I want you to notice that you are sitting inside a structure that is built on the idea of negative liberty. What I mean is the very concept of a user and this whole notion of surrounding us with all of these various tools, that we won't actually need to rely on any kind of community or real world cooperation, but we'll simply do everything through the computer and through electronic means that revolve around our own private needs and desires as individuals. In a sense, it's an extension of negative liberty, or is fundamentally built on negative liberty. As I mentioned last time, I said all of this before I said what negative liberty is. But now I will state my main arguments. Don't be alarmed. I always start by stating the whole thing before I explain the concepts. I will try to explain the concepts as clearly as possible. What I want to say here today, I want to argue in favor of negative liberty. Negative liberty is the observance of the boundaries of the self and the body of individuals. I firmly advocate for it as a fundamental condition for our shared humanity, for creative expression, and for morality, which was championed by the Western world in the wake of that transformative period known as the Axial Revolution, occurring back in the 6th and 7th centuries, for the Common Era, or perhaps more accurately, across those great ancient civilizations, China, India, Judea, and Greece. Oh, and I would like to, I want to discuss the concept of humanity in principle within the West, as essentially the ability to cultivate a self that expresses itself freely and also rationally. That is to say, rational in the sense that it actively engages with a community through meaningful relationships and with the individual members of that community. Essentially the original self-construction of your life. This is a concept whose foundations and roots lie in the Hegelian Kantian tradition, and before that it is of course a Christian concept, and I mean Judeo-Christian, and I want to elaborate on I also want to argue that this freedom is merely a condition of possibility. It is not enough to create an original and unique selfhood or to constitute a proper and fair society, in my view. I think we have to include elements of positive liberty. I mean, positive guidelines on how to create yourself. What kind of society do you want in order to complete it? Otherwise, we won't be able to create a society. I think that's always present to some extent in the world too. We can ignore it, pretend that we live in a neutral world. That's the libertarian position. It says, let's ignore this fact. In a sense, to ignore that we are historical beings, but we are always endowed, created through transcendence towards one another, transcendence towards creative projects, which actually requires reciprocity and requires a very substantive concept of positive freedom. Of course, positive liberty is in tension with negative liberty because it tells you how to build your life, whereas negative liberty says, no, I protect the boundaries of the body, the boundaries of the self. I'm not telling you how to live. Telling someone how to live in the West is perhaps one of the most terrible things a person can do. We immediately think of 1984, of the communist revolution. We think of Mao, we think of fascism, but we think about a lot of terrible things. The third thing I want to argue, besides the case for positive liberty and the idea that it is actually a type of liberty, that it necessarily involves liberty. Sorry, I meant the case for negative liberty and the idea that negative liberty necessarily involves positive aspects. Now, I would like to argue that the negative liberty already exists within us as an intuition. It exists within us as something at the very core of our selfhood, whether we are aware of it or not. It lies at the foundation of our emotional and sensory responses to reality. And I want, and I will also endeavor to demonstrate this. It is in fact institutionalized within the structure of the self. Like, think of that, without negative liberty, we won't know ourselves. In deep ways, even a non-Western person won't exactly know themselves without some concept of negative liberty, and we'll talk soon, and I'll talk about it soon. Now, don't be alarmed. It was complicated, it was complex, it was dense. Now I'm going to unpack the concepts. The discussions on liberty start with Isaiah Berlin, our era's touchstone. In the 60s, he gave a famous lecture and essay defining negative liberty as maintaining boundaries. Yeah, this is what you and the state are not allowed to do to me. I have an absolute right over my body and my soul. I can do whatever I want with my life, including if I want to chop off my fingers or get a tattoo here on my head or anything else I feel like. No one can come between me and the fulfillment of my unique life's purpose. No one can tell me who to associate with, who to join, or what work to do. No one can ever stop my freedom of movement. No one can hinder my personal expression or my free thought, nor my right to enjoy my property and the fruits of my labor. No one can do that provided that I do not infringe upon the rights of others. That is the truly ideal concept. Today we refer to this as fundamental rights, human rights, or civic liberties. And for Berlin, this liberty is minimal. It is a condition of possibility for a liberal, democratic, and egalitarian society in the sense of equality before the law. Do not confuse equality before the law with positive equality. In his view, this is the only legitimate concept of liberty. This concept enables, it never forces, it doesn't dictate how I live my life. Instead, it provides the opportunity to realize my full potential. As you can see in the background, this is the concept of self-actualization. That's me. If self-realization exists, then it needs substance, but more on that later. This freedom grew in modernity thanks to Christianity. It stems from the Judeo-Christian tradition that shaped our modern world. At its core lies the image of God in man, the source of all human rights. Is a source of equality, and the pursuit of a society that's harmonious and conflict-free. This liberty became not only important, but also part of the structure of the state and its institutions, and therefore part of the shaping of the modern self by thinkers like Locke, Kant, Mill, and Montesquieu. However, its foundations lie in the Christian demand for a universal egalitarian community of believers based on consent and choice in the gospel of the Messiah and the way of life implied by that gospel. Now, everyone knows that Christianity is a universal religion. Greek, Jew, woman, man, black, white, all stand equal before God. God incarnates, can incarnate, is incarnating, and can incarnate within their unique inner selves. Paul, perhaps the founder of Christianity, of course, essentially presented the commandments he found in the Torah as a stage in God's revelation. God, he said, tried to forge a covenant with a specific people in a world full of sin, with humanity that is entirely fallen. He tried to do this through a system of laws. But the moment this thing failed over and over, he just decided after a long train of thought, if anyone wants, I'll explain how it works. If you want, I don't know how many people want to hear it, but let's say that at the end of Paul says that from the moment God decided to become incarnate and become a person, all those laws were abolished, and anyone can cling to him and identify with him in a personal and internal way. He can simply place his faith in the narrative of Jesus' salvation and adhere to it through the lens of his own unique and particular personality, because the incarnation of Jesus represents the sum of all possible good human personalities. Simply put, Jesus, or the idea of him, is the image, open to all regardless of gender, race, or faith. Meeting him within the soul is deeply significant. Here, Paul's Damascus revelation demanded the ancient world rethink its entire perception of religion. From a mythical, sacrificial, ritualistic perception, yes, where sacrifices are offered, the king or the elite offer a sacrifice, to a fundamentally different perception where everyone is equal and everyone participates in the ritual together as a community of equals, standing personally before God, right? These values, which in the Middle Ages were latent, were actually only realized among a very, very small elite of monks and non-secular priests. It is only in modernity, through the process of secularization, that they are realized, a process that leads to the modern state. In the sense, secularization is a form of religiousization, but we can discuss that later if you'd like. Now, the second concept of liberty that Berlin presents, positive liberty, is of course a life of a certain kind, or a life according to a certain model, and it signifies ideals and positive instructions on how to live your life. This characterizes all ancient positions, almost all medieval moral positions, but also modern ideologies like communism and fascism. It involves a very, very, very specific ethics and way of life that are required to actually be free, to think and act for yourself. I'll give a few examples of this. Yes, the Torah portion of Kedoshim says, "You shall be holy, for I am holy," and then follows a series of moral commandments and ethical guidelines on how to live. Essentially, God is saying that the image is fully realized in me. You can share in this image by participating in my system of moral virtues. Holiness is the essential characteristic of God, or his moral nature, his personality, or something of that sort. If you do, you can potentially become like me through community and personal morality. And in this way, you also bring my personality or my proper way of viewing life into the world. You establish a community of the holy. This community truly embodies me in its customs, in its character, and in the way it perceives the world. And here the true character of the concept of liberty emerges. Positive liberty can often be replaced by the terms ideal self, worthy self, or good self. Aristotle, the ancient philosopher, defines a truly free man as an Athenian elite who possesses significant wealth, a formal education, and very specific, rigorous political training. In contrast, the Stoics argue that a free person is one who retreats deep into an inner citadel, completely severs all worldly ties, and remains entirely unmoved by any fleeting emotion. They are always moderate, perfectly calm, and remain in total, absolute control of their own mind. The Sufis say only those who've walked the true mystical path are liberated. Communists say only those who grasp the spirit of the times through dialectical materialism and see the class struggle understand their place in the communist future by obeying and accepting that, meaning they are free. The fascist says more or less the same thing about the state. In all cases, we have here very, very different prescriptions for positive liberty, and in all cases, a system is involved that one must enter and be a part of in order to become a free person. But in other words, you must shape your life according to a very, very specific model. Otherwise, you become a slave to passions, idols, external influences, or empty conventions, or to an economic system or a distorted civil system. These are our two types of freedom. Now I want to address negative liberty and point out how it is institutionalized within the Western perspective itself, and to a certain extent within the human perspective in general, because the West has very, very much influenced and shaped the way of looking at things in the East. I will clarify that as well. 20 years ago, I was in India. It was 2001. I was sitting in a rickshaw on the way to a city called Chandigarh. About 20 years ago, I was with a friend.
But wait, just where exactly are we right now? What on earth are you talking about?
I am trying to make it perfectly clear to you that freedom, yes, freedom, that negative liberty, maintaining your boundaries truly is part of the core of your being, the very core of your emotional response system. It truly shapes your character in ways that you do not even begin to realize. Then, for instance, 20 years ago, a close friend and I took a rickshaw all the way to Chandigarh, and then we boarded a truly terrible bus to reach Manali, deep up in the Himalayas. Now, the rickshaw ride took 45 minutes, only 20 kilometers, but that's India for you. The rickshaw had 3 benches, Utpina. 2 identical young Indian men sat in the front. One drove, the other sat beside him, slightly shorter. Clearly they were brothers, yeah? In the back seat sat 3 Indians who were chatting incessantly, and they were completely oblivious. No. Nothing else mattered to them except their conversation. I was seated on the middle bench alongside another Israeli Western guy who is a friend. Suddenly, in the middle of the drive, the younger brother mumbled something to the older brother, and the older brother's reaction was to give him a slap that I can only describe as massive. I don't know. It was something that he shook the. I mean, it was something where his voice, the intensity of it drowned out the sound of the car and reached all the way to the back seat. Let's do a freeze like in acting class. Observe the rickshaw passengers, Shikiri. The younger brother turned to the older one, muttering in Hindi. That sounded like Polish. Nothing to say, you're giving up. The Indians in the back didn't see a thing, no? I mean, they acted as if it never even happened. I think they are from a different caste. It didn't reach them at all. It wasn't an event that held any significance. Me and the other Western Israeli guy, we felt like someone had tapped us in the heart. I mean, it stunned us. The other guy just burst out laughing, almost hysterical from the embarrassment. And for the rest of the ride, we just talked about it. We didn't understand what happened. It took me a long time to understand what happened. The question arises, how is it that the one who took the hit and the people in his culture didn't experience the violation that we did? And the answer is quite clear once you start thinking about it. In modern times, the ideal of authentic, rational, free, and original self-development has permeated the entire world. you see it in movies, you see it on giant billboards. It's broadcast through images, through thoughts, through words. And it's just, no one wants to live the way their father lived. Almost no one says, I'll live by the rules that came before me, and that's how I will be an original person. No. You must live your life just as you are. The Sith practice is absolutely essential that you find the inner courage to fully express your own unique and authentic individuality. However, the philosophical concept of negative liberty has not truly taken hold in many diverse cultures across the globe, as it is constantly competing with deeply ingrained traditional family structures and long-standing rigid community values. Even though these traditional influences are slowly declining, they still cast a long and heavy shadow over the social development of many modern nations in our world today. The idea of individual liberty failed to truly capture the authentic concept of self-realization, and this has created in the East, and to some extent in the West, though much more acutely in the East, a range of contradictions between our ability to realize ourselves and our need to do so. And the institutions, the various institutions block the understanding and the possibility of realizing our freedom, individual liberty, negative liberty, in a way that satisfies the personal aspirations of individuals. Now, accordingly, we Westerners have more or less felt a severe violation of our sovereignty. It was a real violation of our personal sanctity. And for Indians, for whom caste and family are still much more influential structures, no, there was less of that feeling. It's not that you can just do whatever you want to someone in India, but the boundaries are different. The control of the father or the older brother or the mother over the son and the brother in India and the Arab world is very, very different than in the West. In the West, we said the shared sensibility, the system of emotional and intellectual responses actually already embodies the Christian logic that was embedded into our lives through a series of major historical movements, and it is embodied. The concept of negative liberty, or the image and the concept and the negative liberty derived from it, are embodied in Western institutions in such a way that it has become, in many respects, our unconscious way of viewing things. We experience the boundaries of the individual not as a suggestion, but as coercion. You see, Kashma coercion, its source is the coercion that stems from the human condition itself. That is what it means to be human in our eyes. Then if you lock someone in a room, force them to do your bidding and control their life, you are limiting their humanity. Anyone who crosses such boundaries is perceived as evil, insane, or a dictator. The violation is seen as sacrilege. Humanity, in a strictly normative sense, is of course perceived as being fundamentally bound to never cross these boundaries. But the reality is not exactly like that. That's almost entirely true. But even in the West, there are concepts of family that often achieve. These are very, very subtle nuances that I don't want to get into here because I want to emphasize the difference between Western and Eastern societies. I think is important, and it isn't done enough. In the East, there is a gradual dissolution of the power of the community and the clan. But in Southern Europe, there is also a more gradual dissolution, but it is much greater than in the East because they experienced it through the Counter-Reformation. We'll get to that in a moment, and not through the Reformation. Whether in an Indian or an Arab family, he has an automatic status in the home. He doesn't need to prove himself to earn love. He doesn't need to be part of any external institution. On the other hand, parents or older siblings might sacrifice his freedom for the sake of family or even personal interests. I want to return to the discussion on Berlin. What is important to Berlin in the context of these two concepts is to sharply distinguish them from one another and to propose the negative as legitimate and necessary and to reject the positive as a danger and an imposition on liberty. He wants to affirm the negative and reject the positive. Essentially, we must accept that the negative is also positive. It's not neutral, it evolves through history. We must change it, albeit slowly. As Wittgenstein said, the framework of human life also changes. The background picture, but far more slowly.
What does it mean, Yoav, that our negative liberty is also a kind of positive liberty?
Now I'm getting into it. I've actually already started getting into it. I touched on it in the discussion on Christianity, on Judaism, and now I will get into it more precisely. I'll try. Negative liberty embodies a very specific Western theology and narrative. Everyone is equal before God. Everyone partakes in Him. Everyone is protected because of their likeness to Him in certain contexts. Everyone must be able to think and choose their way of life freely. Otherwise, They cannot be redeemed. I'll explain in a moment. These are entirely Christian ideals. Their peak is reached in the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation, in modern society and the nation state. A hierarchical caste society, or let's say one with an individual agent. Take, for example, the society that Abraham, our father, was part of. It cannot generate a prescription of liberty, negative liberty for everyone. There is no equality among the individuals. Only Abraham is the individual. Abraham can cast Hagar and Ishmael into the desert because they are not agents. Now, what is this like? If you want to cut off, you all want to cut off your own finger, it might cause others to raise an eyebrow, but no one can force you not to cut off a finger. No, not to make some mark or some injury to the body that you want. Unlike, and Abraham could kill Hagar and kill, yes, we also have the concept of a rebellious son. You know, the tribal chief has the right to kill his own son if he refuses to cooperate with the tribe. And there is really no problem with that at all. Amashar, how did this position develop in the West? It starts with the book of Genesis. We have a myth that breath, vitality, blood, the human form, moral awareness, the knowledge of good and evil, the principle of animation and vitality of reality as a whole is actually the image of God in man and to a certain extent in the world. This leads to all sorts of things. Look, in the book of Genesis, we're told right away that you can't eat. The Primary Covenant is quite clear. You are strictly forbidden from consuming the vast majority of animal life found upon this planet. From this fundamental principle stems the profound sanctity of life that is afforded to every single member of our community. They are sentient beings, not mere property to be owned or traded by anyone. These essential concepts evolved quite slowly over time, eventually becoming the robust institutions that are only now fully realized within our modern society. But these institutions start to develop in the Bible. You see that the Bible parts of the Bible aren't aware of this. The part that tells the story of Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael doesn't know this story, and it's not really interested in it either. And Abraham is a moral agent, yet other texts acknowledge him, codifying the rebellious, wayward son. They say the father can't just kill his child, he must bring him to the elders with the mother. Note the elevated status of the woman. Yeah, what is this? Women were property in the ancient world. Suddenly she's a partner, a witness. This is something very significant in the Bible. The elders and the community must testify before the congregation and say, this is a rebellious and defiant son. He eats and drinks and does nothing. The community suddenly, the elders notice and see the influence of the idea of this image and the rights of the individual are growing. Parashat Kedoshim is already an embodiment of this influence in a much deeper sense. Subsequently, the sages would take all the institutions related to the image of man and transform them to be even more centered on the individual and on control and autonomy over one's body. In Christianity, as we said, Jesus is the supreme personality, all possible human personalities, the entire range of personas, and he is the bridge to salvation. Accordingly, the idea of developing a unique personality with its own unique ways of life and expression that is faithful to God and his gospel embodies some specific and unique aspect of his personality. And this story becomes central.
What you are essentially saying, Yoav, is that for someone who was raised in a Judeo-Christian cultural space, the concept of selfhood is a virtue. It is fundamentally connected to the act of standing directly before the presence of God.
Christianity emphasized a personal relationship with God, human equality, and embodying him uniquely. Imitating Jesus and living the text became vital, elevating individual rights. By the 1215 Lateran Council, confession became mandatory for all. If confession is a duty, then for each of you, your life, after all, you're confessing things, your affairs become meaningful. In the 13th century, the Franciscan and Dominican orders appear, which allow for an ideal of life within the text and an ideal of life in the world that is applied to details, to more and more details. The Reformation, however, says no. Everyone must understand it. Must understand the text for themselves, stand before God, adhere to him in faith, and live it as a life calling regardless of their profession. The Catholic Counter-Reformation transmits these ideas into the colonies and Catholic kingdoms. By the way, for those who want to explore this further, read Charles Taylor. He has a collection of essays on the subject and a very substantial book on it called A Secular Age. Slowly the situation emerges. The idea of a nuclear family, that the nuclear family is a parallel to the divine family. Yes, son, father, mother. It takes part in the divine holiness. Every family, not just the family of the king and the priest, like in ancient hierarchical societies, but every family. And your daily lifestyle, your work, is your calling. In the Shish ideas, we said their foundations were in the 6th or 7th century, in the actual age, na Plato, the prophets, Confucius, Buddha. But they gradually, as Europe became Christian with the 8th and 9th centuries, the Carolingian Renaissance, then the late Middle Ages with the Magna Carta. We mentioned the obligation of confession, the religious orders, and the decisive wave. We said it is the Reformation that leads to the nation state. In this sense, secularization is a form of religionization, and we will soon see perhaps more precisely what we are talking about. The theology we have absorbed tells us that to be redeemed, I must choose to believe in myself and live out a unique calling. If that is the case, if I must live this way, the state cannot impose a religion upon me. It must guarantee my negative liberty, the freedom to choose the way of life. And the religiosity that is right for me. This is Judeo-Christian theology at its best, at its very best. It requires a person to be free from coercion so they can stand before God and be redeemed. Hence, equality before the law, the separation of powers, institutions that encourage free thought, universities, schools, and also the eventual emergence of the state or the ethnic group, and later nationalism as a basis for identity that is not religious. It has become quite clear to me now that most of us tend to automatically perceive negative liberty as being inherently superior to those positive conceptions, regardless of whether they are Arab, Indian, or from other traditions. I want to show you a little of what happens when a society becomes addicted to this, because this has happened on a broad scale. Where I live, here in Austria and in Northern Europe in general, the United States and the North Atlantic, Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian, and German-speaking community, here children are actually raised in groups as part of an egalitarian school system. The Mishina, they stay there until late. They are educated in equality, discipline, diligence, and group integration. The words at the center are consensus, agreement, and mutual respect. It's very rare for a parent here to interfere in their child's life after the age of 12. They might not even enter their room. It's rare. I mean, the emphasis on personal space is very, very strong. People are encouraged to maintain boundaries and keep to themselves. This isn't a problem of the millennials, as the boomers and Gen X like to say. It's a problem for all of us. The presence of negative liberty and the law on the street is so strong. It is almost impossible to communicate here in a free human way. Yeah, you have to follow so many protocols of etiquette that actually maintain the boundaries between people, and any breach of them, any attempt to create a more personal conversation, is perceived as an attempt to intrude, to violate, to infringe on autonomy, to get into our lives. A person who makes noise is considered crazy. Do you know what private space is like in a place like Sweden, Austria, or Germany? Hush now, Ruhe. It really needs to be a truly quiet place. What is it that they call Vienna again? Gemütlich Schweigen, they say. A quiet, peaceful Vienna. Vienna is calm. The calm Vienna. Oh, and this, and this, and this. It's a good trait, a tremendous trait, a welcoming and dangerously inviting person. What does he want from me? What? I mean, why is he actually doing this to me? Why is he forcing all of his overwhelming, suffocating friendliness on me? What exactly is he trying to get out of me? We just, you see, obviously these aren't things you can control completely and absolutely. No, heaven forbid, you can't control a person. But luckily for us, no one can control human beings. Certainly not for long. But it's easier for people to treat others only in general preconceived ways. Yeah, this grants us control over the interaction, and that is perhaps the key to understanding negative liberty as an institution we perceive as neutral. We feel entirely in control. We cannot be taken by surprise, and here are the results. Most families in Austria meet up only 2 or 3 times throughout the year. The relationships are very cold, regimented. Many people complain that they didn't experience love from their parents and that their worth is conditional upon meeting general standards, which, by the way, are ambiguous. It's unclear what these standards are, as if they were general, but because we are selfish creatures, it very quickly becomes a situation where the individual imposes their own selfishness under the guise of a general standard. People wall themselves off with occupations and a very regimented lifestyle, zealously distinguishing between different spheres of existence. I mean, I have a job, I have a family, I have my coffee, I have my bar, I have my friends. The possibility of engaging in deep connections that could transform the self is something that causes fear, even though the whole system is supposedly designed to allow for it. On the other hand, the Westerners who travel to India often find themselves feeling surprisingly liberated because the individual is no longer the absolute center of their own personal universe. However, there is a significant catch to this whole experience, which is that you do not get to choose your own life partner. But on the other hand, there's coercion here. It's a blatant violation. But at least home is the place you can always return to, and they can't kick you out. Now, what I actually want to say in this lecture is that we would do well not to treat negative liberty as something neutral, that we should broaden our perspectives on it, just as the Arab, the Indian, and the Chinese need to open up their traditional perspectives to more negative liberty and allow the Teshe and then Itashtu undergo a transformation alongside their concepts of family and community. But we also need to let off some steam. As in a certain sense, the technological world needs to change a bit too. You notice how everything is built so that you can betray any committed relationship or values that involve community. Committed relationships feel like a tax on me. Wait, do I have to be in a relationship with this person now? No, I'd rather just jump from chat to chat on my computer. I don't feel like dealing with you, so I'll just block you. This is really reflected in the technological way we relate to one another. Yeah, it wouldn't hurt Europeans and Americans, us I mean, to let go of our attachments, to open up and to move beyond conventional selfishness, because at the end of the day, our negative liberty is just an expression of the conventional selfishness that developed in the West. It's not some absolute pure truth. As long as we view wisdom as a closed and neutral concept, akin to a concept from the natural sciences, rather than as theology, as a product of metaphysics and theology that possess a historical narrative and a constantly evolving tradition, we will be unable to transcend it. Yeah, we cannot further develop humanity. As long as the negative concept is not accepted as a constitutive part of the core of proper politics and ethics in the East, the Easterner will be unable to reach the ideal of self-realization that is already projected onto them, to the Western images they absorb, because this ideal presupposes some conception of negative liberty. If I can't decide where I'm going or how I live, then, well, my story is over. Then I certainly can't realize my true self. Basically, the central concept here is transcendence. If we don't develop more diverse ways of transcending in the West, if we don't keep developing them, we won't develop our freedom either. And if the Eastern nations do not develop more ways to genuinely guarantee that this deviation is legitimate, that it is something that we all share and not something forced upon the individual, they will find themselves stuck as well. And we will all continue to experience the persistent gaps between our needs and our capabilities. But I think that in this sense, and I will end here, identity politics and political correctness are the modern way to ensure that we never change. I cannot speak to any of you about your core values. I am not allowed to address the differences between me and you. I am a Mizrahi man born into a religious home. Why would that even bother talking to an Ashkenazi man or woman from a Marxist home? I can't even say, you're an Ashkenazi from a Marxist home, so our perspectives differ. Let's try to bridge the gap. No, that's a violation. Oh no, I'm a racist. How absolutely terrible. When you take them together, it is quite simply the end of all meaningful discourse. And I would describe this combination of identity politics and political correctness as being nothing more than a gated community. We find ourselves isolating, blocking out all critical discourse and any sense of a moral hierarchy. To me, my father's kubach is just as vital as your lofty human rights. That is nice, very nice indeed. Neither of us is able to talk. Everything remains exactly the same as it was. So that it is all relative, and it is truly deeply morally dangerous. That is not how the real world actually works. And it was, and it is the beginning of the end for our entire culture and our inevitable decline. That is it. That is basically what I was trying to tell you all along. There might have been a few additional words, but they are not really essential, and I believe there is a minute left.
What I wanted to ask is whether a person's right to commit suicide falls. Is it legitimate within the framework of the liberties in the approach of negative liberty?
Anna, Aijan, that is an excellent question, one of the best. I have been thinking about it lately. What happens when a person commits suicide? He does not just kill his own self. He kills all the parts of his selfhood that exist with others. I am formed through relationships with others. Through them, I become myself. Through the encounter with the other, I am with him. Yeah, when I kill myself, I kill many other people. And that is to say, from the perspective of positive and exceptional liberty, it is clearly forbidden to commit suicide. But negative liberty creates exactly the illusion that suicide is only my end, and therefore I have a right over my life. Nonsense. Yes, legally I have a right to my life, yeah? But in essence, myself resides with those close to me, with my loved ones, with my projects, and any harm to myself is a devastating blow to their own selves. Therefore, my answer is that the law is based on negative liberty. I am forced to tell you yes. In terms of legitimacy, I say no.
Anyone who is actively involved with the Iran organization is well aware that whenever there is a genuine emergency, it signifies that our dedicated volunteers have come to the realization that the individual who has called is truly intending to end their own life. They contact the local police department right away, and officers are dispatched to the scene to intervene in order to prevent the suicide from occurring. So is that action still considered legally legitimate? And why exactly the police? By what specific legal authority do the police intervene to stop this act?
Great. So by virtue of the fact that we don't truly live out negative liberty to the fullest, the pretense, I mean, you can't prosecute him for wanting to commit suicide, right? Maybe he disturbed the public order. He took a leap from the 20th floor, but he is not here. But in our hearts and in the depths of our social order, we understand that negative liberty is just a crust or a very narrow core, and so we won't let that happen. We understand that if I tear myself away from you, I am tearing you apart.
Thanks, Yoav. But I am reading Nomi's question because she is not in a space that allows her to unmute. And I am also adding a question of my own. So first of all, Nomi asks, you derive the possibility of choice in positive liberty from negative liberty. I'm not sure if the option doesn't exist, or if it's not being implemented, or if it is being implemented in parts of the system you mentioned. In other words, is there an option to make positive choices from within negative liberty? And I'd like to add another question to that. Then, as you said, ultimately there is a certain discourse that is indeed prevalent in some parts of the left, within which there is absolute moral relativism, and in it positive liberty, and even
the right as well. The right as well.
The right is fine too. There is no hierarchy between these liberties. I see negative liberty as a prerequisite. In that sense, it ranks highest. If you live under a regime lacking it, my friend, change it. Then you are obligated to open up positive liberty. But first, the base must be negative liberty. I would appreciate it if you could address this, and it also relates to Nomi's question. Thanks.
First and foremost, I am myself. And I certainly suggested that we cannot now just give up our negative liberty. On the contrary, it is truly the core. It is the core and a condition of possibility. It is what protects us, and it is the core. But it is also a shifting foundation. And I mentioned Wittgenstein here. Wittgenstein says, listen, our core values are background pictures. They are like the channels of a river, channels that have hardened, and life flows through them. Slowly, the channels themselves also become part of the flow, but this process is much slower. And that is why I tell you that in our time, surely, upholding negative liberty remains a necessity for where we currently stand. Even a measure of zeal is required there, but at the same time, we must remember that this is not a matter of dogma. Yeah, we simply cannot accept a strictly dogmatic Christian perspective, one where the concept of negative freedom is seen to mirror the traditional path towards spiritual redemption through rigid dogma, much like the belief that Jesus was born specifically to atone for all of our human sins. We are obligated to change our approach, remaining fully aware of these inherent boundaries. And we must exercise extreme caution whenever we consider altering the fundamental nature of our negative freedom. I have no formula po la ship po natin. Propose one and you're trapped in a locked up in the place you flee. That's why you can't sleep. No one sits quietly. No one sleeps. A high life center is nothingness, a black obelisk. No way around it, Hillel. There is simply no possible way for us to defeat him. However, we might be able to handle him by performing a ritual. It is no coincidence that the black cube stands at the center of Mecca and people walk around it, but we cannot remove it. And as long as we cannot remove it and cannot conceive of a world without it, we have no choice but to continue doing things provisionally, regulating them as laws and constantly reforming them. navigating between values and laws, between how we feel and our intuitions on one side and rules on the other, and changing in a more responsible way. But there will never be a state of perfection out of the crooked timber of humanity, known as Kant said. That is the Protestant way of saying that original sin is here with us. It is never going anywhere.
Yoav, where do you see Israel in this spectrum between positive liberty and negative liberty?
Israel is a fascinating experiment. Fascinating, it's similar. All the Europeans who come here to Israel say, it's like the south of Europe. It's not like the south of Europe. It's true that the closeness and the ability to reach out to one another, especially the fact that there are no barriers at all between people, whether you're Jewish or Arab or whatever. You start a conversation with someone, bam. He's already asking, where are you? Who are your parents? What takes 3 minutes in Israel takes years in Austria, even 20. It's just like that. And so usually Israel has its pros and cons because we infringe on freedoms. And there's also the complex political situation, the conflict, and the violation of human rights, including those of Haredim, Ethiopians, Arabs, and all sorts of other groups. Some of it is institutionalized, and some of it is just part of the fact that our ruling public has a certain mentality and sensibility, which creates a lot of distortions, but it also puts Israel in a very special place. The Shita avoids the Southern European disease, the collapse of family and tribe. And people are spinning their wheels, no longer driving society. Tens of thousands of 30 to 50-year-olds, even friends of mine in Italy, live with their parents, barely working or working under the table. Just sitting around all day. בקושי עובדים קצת בשחור, רוב היום יושבים, the desire for the good life, the rise in the prestige of chefs and all sorts of aesthetic practices, while detaching the whole story, like the whole story of the products from them and playing on sentimentality. These things are ills of Israeli society. In my opinion, it would be easier to deal with them, and they plague the south of Europe. Therefore, there is both an opportunity and a danger here, and the situation is also much more explosive and much bloodier. So you see, where there is openness and possibility, there is also danger and mutual bleeding and open wounds. I don't think can ignore these things. I think we need to bring them to the forefront. Please do not shy away from having open, honest conversations about the various differences that exist between different people and their communities. You must never simply ignore them. You should consistently emphasize the fundamental fact that individuals possess no inherent or natural rights, and that no single culture or specific person is inherently superior to any other. For instance, I might happen to excel at a particular moral skill, but Hillel will surely excel at something entirely different, and that's perfectly fine. It's the same in all areas of life and in matters of culture. That's how I see it.
You're setting a significant layer for us, I think, in the sense that you're saying we are creatures constantly composed of both positive liberty and negative liberty, and the ability to create the constant and shifting balance between them is the ability to create a just society. And translating this into a political language is a major challenge for those gathered here. Yoav Tal has the final question. Is negative liberty compatible with the desire to protect the environment and limit the damage done to it? And is Indian nirvana also expression of negative liberty, or is it something else?
Naturally, any series talk about our environment clashes with a dogmatic view of negative liberty, because ostensibly the only sanctity, as understood in Protestant Christianity, and we are products of that tradition, focuses solely on the individual and preserving their life. Forget the book of Genesis, forget that animals and every living thing lives through God and that they have rights. And in the book of Genesis, it's clear, we aren't allowed to eat most of them. That's not a trivial matter. And we're not allowed to, and then no blood, and so on. So clearly, the question is between a dogmatic view of negative liberty and a view that understands that even negative liberty is positive liberty. It's just the core or the condition of its possibility. Second, the link between nirvana and negative liberty stems from the fact that Christianity and Judaism are products of the axial age. And the axial age emerged as people gathered into complex mythical societies, forming massive populations. This necessitated rigid hierarchies, captains, tribal chiefs, or powerful kings, all needing to justify their authority. So they told a myth about how the god ascends, becomes a god, or sorry, the king becomes a god at the carnival, for example, and the priest king becomes a god, and the world is created anew. And these hierarchies and clear roles had to be justified through myths. The Axial Age revolution in the 6th or 7th century comes along and says, wait a minute, guys, no. There is a universal perspective. We are all, in some sense, human beings, a universal critical viewpoint. It emerges when there is a sufficient intellectual elite that becomes a sub-elite and begins to criticize the existing power structures. It's no coincidence that it's Hulda, the prophetess, Shaphan the scribe. And the third one, I don't remember, and the priest, Hilk, and the son of Hilkiah, who are the ones who find the book of Deuteronomy, which limits the king, which forces the king to act under the power of the law. Yeah, you see all the elements of the Axial Age's sub-elite rising together. Christianity is already a continuation of the Axial Age. Rabbinic Judaism, by the way, both Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity are taking the Axial Age to the next stage. And this is also happening in India with the Buddha, who rises and says, wait, what is this? There is suffering in the world out there. You know, you can't hide in your palace, can't save from death and sickness. The Buddha must go out. He must face the world's suffering, making his values universal. Those are the connections. Read this book to understand them. אז אלה הם הקשרים. מי שרוצה להבין אותם, אז שיקרא את הספר הזה.
Yes, but in middle writing, what is that?
Religion in Human Evolution, a book by a guy named Robert Bella. Religion in Human Evolution. I'm sorry, it's 600 pages, guys, and it's in easy, pleasant, and flowing English. It covers China, it covers India, it covers Judea and Greece. It's not the deepest thing you'll ever read in your life, but it's one of the most useful things you'll ever read in your life, in my opinion, in the context we were talking about.
Thank you very much, Yoav. Happy holidays, everyone.
Thank you all so much. I'm very moved, especially since I'm stuck here alone. Anyone who wants to write to me or ask me questions is welcome to. Hillel can give out my details or share them via email if he wants. I am at everyone's service.
Please feel free to get in touch with us if you would personally like to reach out to Yoav directly. Once the editing process is complete, Yoav's lecture will be uploaded to our website in just a few days' time. You can find it at videos.idea.org.il.